Professor Eric E. Johnson. I'm at Yosemite National Park to talk about breach of duty. I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. Someone comes running down. They startle me. I fall off. A reasonable person wouldn't come running down the trail when someone's absorbed in scenery. Breach of duty. The rule for the standard of care, the default standard of care, when you're doing breach of duty analysis is just what would the reasonable person do under like circumstances. If we look right over here, it says foot trail only. So if I were to drive a motorcycle along here, the reasonable person wouldn't do that, especially after seeing that sign. That's a breach of duty. It's that easy. It's just reasonable person. What would the reasonable person do? That's the standard. It's not hard. Walking along, looking into the lens while you're on a difficult trail with lots of sand down there, you lose your footing, definitely breach of duty. Look at this box, that is very padlocked up. This is a reasonable approach to keeping bears out, see? A reasonable person was here and put all this stuff on here so the bears wouldn't get in. Because that's what a reasonable person does. Takes reasonable precautions. It's so discouraging when you bust along to get up here and then you see that people have hauled rocks up here to make this trail for you. I'm down here at the Merced River. This water is what's scientifically called kind of gross. Now, if I were to say, hey, this is safe to drink, you should go ahead and have a drink, the reasonable person would do that, so that'd be a breach. Maybe it's not filled with anything like brain-eating amoeba, then it won't cause any injury and we won't have a full negligence cause of action, but it's still a breach. Because like I said, it's kind of gross. There's deer and stuff, they're all peeing in this. Now, what if I were to say to someone, you should tell that guy that it's safe to drink this water? That's also a breach, because the reasonable person wouldn't tell someone to tell someone else that it's safe to drink water like this, because the reasonable person wouldn't drink this water, or tell someone they could drink this water, or tell someone they could tell someone they could drink this water. Hypo time. Suppose this person has gone off the trail and is scampering and gambling downhill toward a cliff's edge. Is that a breach of the duty of care? The answer is yes. The reasonable person wouldn't run off the trail toward a cliff's edge. Therefore, that's a breach of duty. Let's tweak the facts. Suppose the guy is still off the trail and still hurrying toward the cliff's edge. But add the circumstance that there's a person down there who appears to need rescue. Is the guy breaching his duty of care now? The answer is probably not. The reasonable person might run off trail toward a cliff's edge if there was a person down there seeming to need rescue. So that might not be a breach. By the way, I don't know what those people were doing, but I thank them for staying in camera range and for playing Hypo time with us. We found my favorite thing in Yosemite National Park. It's a safety cone. What is it warning us of? I have no idea. I guess there's something dangerous out there. It's so weird. I have no idea what it is. Hypo time. Let's do it. Let's say I'm holding my 3-year-old kid on my shoulders while I'm getting this footage atop Vernal Falls in Yosemite National Park. Is that a breach? The answer is yes. By the way, I did not have a kid on my shoulders when I was taking that footage. I would never do that. I care too much about safety. On the exam, how do I know what the reasonable person would do? You just guess. In real life, we're going to ask a jury. What do they know? Well, everything, because they're a jury, and in our system, we just assume they know everything. Have an unanswerable question? Ask a jury. So this says, horses and hikers, for everyone's safety, horses have the right of way. Please stand quietly by the side of the trail when stock passes. So if you don't stand quietly by and you're loud when a horse is trying to pass, that's a breach of duty right there. I mean, especially after you've read the sign, because even if the reasonable person would know not to do that, once you've read the sign, you're charged with that additional knowledge. I can just do some black letter law here. The standard of care doesn't go down for people who are ignorant of what's reasonable, but the standard of care does go up for those who have superior knowledge or skill for how to avoid danger. Once you know that knowledge, then you have to use it, because the reasonable person under the circumstances being that they know this knowledge, then that reasonable person would use that knowledge to not spook the horse. The horse goes down the side of the mountain, breach of duty, and then you'd have your actual causation, proximate causation, and the damages to the horse. Don't hurt horses, that's terrible. Orange cap for safety. Now this is an exposed granite. There was a sign way back that said, during lightning, do not hang out next to granite. So if you hang out next to granite, or tell someone, hey, you should hang out next to that granite during a lightning storm, definitely a breach of duty. Hypo time. You ask Ranger Rachel what she thinks of your hiking the Half Creek Meadow Mist Falls Trail. The reasonable person would have no reason to suggest you avoid the gorgeous trail, but Ranger Rachel, with a superior sense of smell, can tell you're packing PB&J sandwiches, and she happens to know there's an aggressive and hungry bear along the trail that attacked a hiker earlier this morning and took off with his PB&J filled backpack. Is Ranger Rachel breaching her duty of care to suggest you hike the trail, not mentioning anything about the bear?
The answer is yes.
Ranger Rachel must use her superior skill and knowledge in giving you hiking advice if she's going to fulfill her duty of care, because the standard is adjusted upward to what the reasonable person would do with that superior skill and that superior knowledge. And a super-sniffing, bear-knowledge-knowing reasonable ranger would tell you to avoid the trail. Therefore, Ranger Rachel breached her duty of care.
Here's some trees cut down. It's a good place to talk about custom. All right? Come over here. Come over here with me and let's talk about custom.
Now let's say, here's the thing. It's a very simple rule. Custom is probative, but not dispositive. Now you should use those words because they make it sound smart, but actually it's not that hard. Custom tends to show what the standard of care is, but it doesn't settle the matter. Probative means tends to show, and dispositive means settles the matter. So, let's say I'm cutting down a tree. What am I supposed to do? If you've seen cartoons, you know I'm supposed to yell, timber! Okay, it's a custom. It's a custom when you cut down a tree. If I don't yell timber when I'm cutting down a tree, we can say that's a breach of the standard of care.
That's a breach of the standard of care!
It's a breach of the duty of care because custom is to yell timber. That doesn't settle the matter. It's not dispositive, but it's probative. It's probative that if everyone says timber when they cut something down and I didn't, it tends to show that was the standard of care and that I breached.
Custom tends to show the standard of care, but it's not dispositive. Here I should note a big exception. Custom is dispositive for determining the standard of care for professional malpractice, such as medical malpractice. I like listening to myself talk like this. Echo!
Hypo time. You stop on the trail and speak with hiker Hank, who's headed the other way. You exchange information about wildlife sightings. All of a sudden, hiker Hank coughs, straight ahead, toward your face. Later, you find out that you caught squirrel pox, and DNA evidence traces it back to hiker Hank. Infectious disease experts testify you likely wouldn't have gotten sick if he'd coughed into his elbow. Can the fact that nearly everyone knows people are supposed to cough into their elbow help establish that hiker Hank breached his duty of care under the reasonable person standard?
The answer is yes.
Coughing into your elbow is a custom. As such, you can argue to the jury that it indicates that the reasonable person would cough into their elbow. That is, custom is probative of the standard of care, but it's not dispositive, so you won't get a directed verdict, for instance. Hiker Hank can try to argue that he was acting as the reasonable person would when he coughed straight ahead, but he's still gross.
From an issue spotting perspective in torts, what does all this suggest? I have no idea. This is really more of a matter for botany and potentially wild area management.
Ow! Can we all agree we're just gonna sleep against this rock?